Hi, everyone, and welcome to our session on data governance. I know, governance sounds like a very dry topic, but trust me, it is actually the most critical part of your job in health data science. Think of it in this way: technology and laws are the locks and walls of a building, but trust, it is the only reason that people are going to walk through that front door. So today we're going to look at how we can build that trust so we can actually use data to save lives. So we have what is a data use agreement, a DUA. Let's start with the paperwork. A DUA is basically a legally binding contract between the person who has the data, like the provider, and the person who wants it, the requester. To keep it simple, think of DUA as a rental lease. The landlord, we're taking him as a provider, right? They give you the keys, the access to the house, but with the house rules that you cannot have loud parties and you have to move out date, right? Like end date of your research. So they'll give you the liability. If you break a window, you'll pay for it. In data terms, if the data is misused, the DUA tells you exactly who is responsible for it. Okay, and then we will be taking the five safe frameworks. We have five safe frameworks. It is more like a checklist. The first is safe projects. That is the data used legal, ethical, and approved by an IRB. Moving on to the second one, which is safe people. Are the researchers qualified? Are they trained enough? And are they trusted? And moving on to the next one, which is safe settings. Is the access environment secure? Like the environment we're working in, the networks we're using, the internet we're using, is this safe or not? We have to make sure that the environment source we're using is safe. Then comes the safe data. Has the data been treated to minimize identification risk or not? Like, is the data safe or not? And then we come to the safe outputs. That are the final results checked to ensure no re-identification. So basically, we're gonna see the final results of our data. That are they ensure that there's no re-identification in that or not? We have levels of data cleaning. So basically, we will be cleaning the data. It is a toolkit. How do we actually clean it? And here's a helpful way that you can clean your data by. The de-identification. It is like taking away someone's ID card and you have removed their name and SCNIC, but they'll still look themselves because you can still, go back to it. That there comes the pseudo anonymization, which is replacing the IDs with codes. Like we have learned in the previous lectures that we replace the names with the codes. Here we are replacing IDs with the codes. And then we have anonymization, which is like plastic surgery. Okay, you can take it as plastic surgery, like you have changed the data so much that even if you see the person again, you wouldn't recognize them. It's meant to be irreversible. Okay, so then we have that how we can manipulate the toolkit, how we can manipulate the data. First come the suppression. What is suppression? Just like deleting a risky data point, like removing the only 100-year-old patient data in a small town to so that they don't stand out. That is how the suppression works. If I talk about the recoding is you can take an example by like saying that turning age 24 into turning an age group of 20 to 30, like generalizing it more. Okay, and then we go to the recalculation. Instead of saying patient arrived from March this to that, we say day 5 of the study, the day we started our study on. Okay, and then we have perturbation, and that is basically adding a little noise into it. Okay, uh, for example, we are swapping ages of two similar patients. That is adding noise to the data. Okay, and next on, we're moving to the access models, open versus controlled. So we have two different types of access models. One is open and the other is controlled. Open access model. Here, the data is freely available to download. You have open access to it, but the risk is obviously high. Once the data is downloaded, you lose the control over it. So, just like the magazines in a lobby, everyone is reading them. Every one coming by, going on, they're reading the same magazine. So that magazine is an easy access to everybody coming up there. So then we have controlled access. That is gold standard. So data stays behind a secure barrier. It's safe haven. Like, not everyone has the access to that specific data. It requires the DUA and credentials to open it, right? So it's more like a rare book selection in a library. So if you have a library to yourself, you have a rare book selection and section there. So not everyone can read them just like that. A magazine or lobby, right? Moving on to the next part, which is consent under GDPR. Okay. Um, we can take an example of saying that Spotify versus iTunes. Think of it like that. Okay, let's just get into it. Under GDPR, consent can't just be a check this box situation. We cannot just go like check this box, whatever comes in it. No, we have to be specific about it. Withdrawables. There's a big debate on this to be done, to be honest, like the broad consent, and then we have dynamic consents and all that. So if I talk about the broad consent, you agree wants to general area like cancer research and all that. It's like a Spotify subscription you're taking. You pay once and get the whole library. But if I talk about the dynamic consent, that is you use an app to say yes or no to every single new study. It's like iTunes store that you buy, approve songs one by one. So this is the easiest way that I could explain these two types of consents to you. Okay, and then we have okay, then we have this is here the same thing I explained earlier, the Spotify and the iTunes examples. And then we have the new EU regulations. Okay, if I talk about the EU regulations, we have Data Governance Act, DGAA. DGA, that basically introduced the concept of data altruism, which allows the individuals to voluntarily donate their data for the public good, like science, through recognized organization. Just like for example, if a person is dying and they're donating their organs for the science experiments and all that, data is similar. Data is very crucial. So if somebody is donating their data for the public use, that is great. So that is the Data Governance Act. And then we have European Health Data Space, EHDS, the game changer. It basically moves away from individuals' consent for secondary use. Public bodies grant access for research. Patients have an opt out right rather than needing the opt in for every study. So the patients are not giving the consent, the public parties are giving the consent to it. All right. Then we have the future federated learning. Okay, the concept here is that instead of moving patient data to a central server, the code travels to the data. Hospital trains the model locally and send back only the mathematical updates. It is giving back just the mathematical updates, not the actual patient records. Okay, like everyone. Okay, let's take an example. For example, everyone cooks in their own kitchen and they share the recipe improvements, right? Not the food itself. Okay, so that is that. So there would be risks to it. The risk could be ethical risk, reverse engineering, that attacks can reconstruct data from model updates, and then we can face biasness over it. Models may learn better from well-funded hospitals with more data ignoring smaller populations, and the hospitals which doesn't really have greater data, or they don't really have funds enough to train a model, they'll be lag behind, right? And then we have trust imperative. Technologies and law are just the lock walls, as Parai said in the start. Trust is the social contract. Successful data governance builds a system where the patients trust their data will be safe and will be used for just the public good, not misused. As you move forward, just remember that governance isn't a hurdle to jump over. It's the foundation of your work. And without trust, we have no data. Without data, we have no science. Thank you so much.